Hey hey! Welcome! This is a kind of a different video that I'm making today. So I'm still learning about this YouTube stuff, right? And I want to sit down with you today and have a introduction course, so to say, about the runes and what they are. And in order to do that in a very pedagogical way, I don't think that it is appropriate if I'm just walking around outside and having like nice B-roll shots and not showing and explaining and, you know, taking the time. So today we are here. This is the Moose Lady classroom. Welcome. In the Moose Lady classroom we have 2 students. You, 1. Is it rude to point? I don't know. I'm the teacher, I make up the rules, right? You are here. And our second student, so you don't feel lonely, is Oscar. He is also a stone enthusiast, as you might see. He's out of focus, but I promise you, he's here with you and he will also learn. I find it very important to understand the context of different things, just for fun, but also in order to understand, because I am out there, I'm at these ancient places, I'm filming them, I'm talking about stone cists with runes on them from the Viking Age, and the runes kind of look a bit weird to maybe what you're used to. And then in the other video I might be by another stone and that looks completely different. So I thought that, you know what, an introduction to what the heck runes are would be good for everyone, right? This is very much base level, first day of school classroom stuff, okay? So I won't go into the deep water yet, okay? So hopefully we will learn a lot today. You and, not me, I'm the teacher still, but Oscar over here. So I hope you are in a good mood, you have good spirits, you're here to learn, and that we will have a good time together. Welcome to Runes, a basic introduction. Okay, so let's start in the right end. What are runes? Runes are the carved down documentation of the spoken language of their time. That is a full-on sentence to say. Easily put, they are these historical symbols that has been carved down on different materials, and their purpose is to mimic and reproduce sounds of the language that they represent. So in that sense, they are kinda comparable to the alphabets of today. You see a letter, you see multiple letters, that's a word. I know how these sound together, kinda. And then you put that word into a sentence and then all of a sudden we all can understand each other. And if you're really hardcore, you try to speak in your not native language and try to explain stuff about ancient languages that are not being spoken anymore. Runes are very old. The oldest rune find we have in 2023 is the Svingerud stone that they found in Norway. And the Svingerud stone's runes is from around the year 0, which, I mean, that's a whole lot. That's a long time ago, up until 250 AD, which is very exciting. It means that these symbols have been around for much, much longer than we could ever anticipate. Usually when we speak about runes, we are talking about them in a context of that their language would be Northern Germanic languages, like Proto-Germanic languages. Also Old Norse, and then further down the line, the different variations of ancient Scandinavian languages. Geographically, runes have been mostly found in Scandinavia. So this is kind of the home of the runes, so to say. But I am not saying that runes are only found in Scandinavia. That is incorrect. A bigger part of Europe that has been using Germanic languages as their base, they have also had rune finds as well. And I mean, if you look at the British Isles, there's also a lot of runic finds there. So, but in Scandinavia is where they have mostly been found and probably used. Runes are also, together with Latin, ancient Greek and ancient Bulgarian, amongst the oldest documentation of an area's indigenous language, which is also a pretty cool thing. You can flex with that knowledge at parties. Enough about me babbling away. Let's look at the runes actually. Very much in a teacher-esque way, because I am the teacher. Oscar, you pay attention now as well. I have drawn them down here, as you can see. And I have also done so, let's see if it focuses. I have written down the today's letters here, as you can see. And this is to show like the development of the runes. These also vary. So if you don't recognize a rune here, if you miss a rune from here, or if you have seen another variation of a rune from any of these pretty Futharks or rune rows, you could be completely correct. There are local variations to these things. I have just written down the most basic variations that you would find. What I want to show with this is that runes are not static. We have the elder Futhark up here from year 0 around to the 8th century. And then down here we have the younger Futhark, and that is like 8th to 11th century normally. And then here, as you can see, a lot of stuff is going on down here. This is the medieval rune row, and this is 11th to 14th century. But I mean, in some locations in Sweden, it is up to the 16th and I mean, even 20th century. But before we put this away, I want to make this very clear when it comes to runes. There's a lot of discussion like, oh, this rune is used this and not in this time and here and there and this is wrong and this is right and da 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 da. Runes are not static characters. They are not static in a way where they are not static in time. Language develop, language change, right? We can all agree to that, and we see it here. And these are the 3 biggest changes in language, right? So we have the elder Futhark, which is, as you can see, pretty long, right? And then something happens. And then when we come to the Viking Age rune row, the younger Futhark here, you see there's a lot less runes. This goes together with how the language is developing. Steinar up here becomes Stein. Yara becomes Ar. You see, so with the language being shortened down, we also see the rune rows getting shortened down. And the next big evolution with the runes is when the Latin alphabet, as you can see here, down here, can it focus? Maybe, yes. The Latin alphabet makes an entrance in Scandinavia. And here you can see we have the A, B, C, which is also Z, or Z maybe in English. And it continues like that. And we have a couple of quirky ones. And as you can see, there's more letters in the Latin alphabet than they have runes. And these can also vary. But we will come back to these, okay? So hold tight. You know what all teachers need? They need some coffee break. There's also a very popular question that I have gotten on my Instagram more than once. That question is, can you count with runes? Are there numbers? Can we do the math? How does it work? So regarding numbers in relation to runes, as with most ancient Scandinavian things and details, we don't know how they did it. That is a very unsatisfactory kind of answer, but it's the truth nonetheless. But we do know that the ancient Scandinavians were good merchants. They could count. They had some kind of a system for it. Even though we don't really know exactly how they did it, we do have examples. We have runestones talking about different numbers. For example, we have this runestone. I will show it here. This runestone in Stora Ek in Västergötland is a great example of a runestone mentioning numbers. This runestone tells a story about a father honoring his son that has passed away. It further covers the information what the father can expect to inherit from his son. This father gets none less than 3 farmsteads and 30 marks. Mark is a former weight system used in ancient Scandinavia, but it's also a currency in coins. These marks the father can expect to get from a guy named Erik that owed his son those marks. On this stone in particular, since this is the example I'm using, 3 is written as tria, like in 3 farmsteads, and 30 is carved like tria tiugu. And these words are old for 3 and 10. So they had a system, but it seems like they have written it down with the runes, like words. There's also something, speaking of counting with runes, that is called etter or ets. This is something that I will cover in my next video, where we do a little bit of a deep dive. But very easily said, these ets or etter, when it comes to runes, it is basically a counting system which you could use to decipher words that are hidden on runestones. Very exciting stuff. That is why it will be its own video. It is so exciting and I'm so looking forward to it. I hope you stick around for that one too. So when we think about runes, most people are thinking about Vikings, right? The Viking Age. And this is not completely off, since the most rune stones we have found around Scandinavia comes from the Viking Age. So it is very natural that that is where your head would go when thinking about runes. It's not wrong, but since we have already talked about the year 0 and knowing that the Viking Age is around the 700, 800 AD, there's a long while before the Viking Age that runes are established. And then there's also a long while afterwards that the Viking Age ends that the runes are also used. There's a whole lot of people besides the Vikings that used the runes. Let's just be clear about that. Teacher coffee break. Let's get back to this, okay? Do I have a pointer somewhere? Look here. Can be a teacher for real. These are rune rows, also called Futharks. A Futhark is the collection of rune characters from specific eras. So easily, like most easily explained, it is kind of the type of alphabet where the characters come in a specific order, but maybe not as specific as the nowadays alphabet. These can vary. These can vary locally and in time. And there are more runes than these. They can vary in how they look. There are short twig runes, there are long twig runes. There are local variations here and there. So this on here is not the ultimate truth, okay? Let's just establish that. But the expression Futhark comes from these guys. Oh, see. The expression Futhark comes from these. So we have had ancient finds, the Kilver stone, for example, in Sweden, that is dated around the year 400 AD. The rune row starts with these runes, Futhark. And then we have found the rune row from the younger Futhark on several ancient leavings, and they also spell out Futhark in the beginning. So as you can see, that is kind of where the idea of the name comes from, because this is equal, right? It's quite nasty actually, kind of dark. But the oldest find containing the younger Futhark runes is from a skull fragment of a human. It is found in Ribe in Denmark. But yeah, inside of the skull of a human, this has been carved down. Since repetition is the mother of all knowledge. Elder Futhark, year 0 to 8th century, 24 runes. Younger Futhark, 8th to 11th century, containing 16 runes. Then we have the medieval rune row, and it's circa 11th to 14th to 16th to the beginning of the 20th century in some places. And this contains 16 to 27 plus different runes. I will write it down as well as I go. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, so we have covered what these are. But where did they come from? If you are to believe myths and legends, and some runestones actually that has this carved down, the runes came from the gods. Easy, right? Then we know. Let's pack up, class dismissed. Everyone can go on a break. This is still a very active discussion amongst linguists, historians, archaeologists, runologists. And there are 3 main theories where the runes could have possibly come from, if not from the gods. We have something called the Greek theory. Insert picture of olives here in the Greek flag. We have something called the Etruscan theory. And then we also have the Latin theory. So 3 main theories. So the Greek theory centers around that the Goths created the runes. This theory basically centers around the idea that the runes would have been created when the Goths encountered Greeks and Romans in the ancient times. But this theory also concludes that the runes would have been made around the year 250 AD. Again, now we have found older evidence than that, so that theory kinda falls away. The Etruscan theory takes a little bit of a different approach. This theory basically lands in the solution that the runes were created in southern Germany around the last century BC. But this theory also kinda gets pushed to the side because we have not found those runic finds we need to find in southern Germany in order to back this theory up. So it kind of falls flat. The Latin theory centers around the idea that the Romans actually were the ones who inspired to the runes being used in Northern Europe. It is a known fact that the Romans came in close contact with Germanic people thanks to old tales they've left behind, or old scriptures. Sorry, not tales, but scriptures. No ancient Roman historians come after me, okay? And there's also the fact that the Roman alphabet and the runes have some kind of resemblance to each other. We have, for example, these runes resemble these letters, and so on. But also, this theory doesn't really explain the divergences in sound values and forms of the characters and so on. So it's kind of, So basically, we don't know really. There's theories, and when it all comes down to it, when does inspiration and borrowing from other languages and alphabets, when does that become its own, right? Like, when does that shape-shifting take place where the runes are a separate thing from the, let's say, a Latin alphabet and so on? Since that is how culture works, it's constantly changing and it might be hard to figure it out. It might seem that finding the origins of the runes is impossible, but impossible is, however, a word that enthusiasts and experts have never understood, so maybe one day we will have the answer of which of these theories is the most likely. Maybe there's a fourth. So in order to understand context, right, and to understand the runes and to understand what they were used for, we have to talk about runestones. Let's start this off with a very, very important thing. We have no way of knowing today how many people actually could read runes when they were carved down. We don't know how big part of the population could actually read them. We have no idea which class of the population could read them, if everyone could, if some were illiterate, if most were illiterate. We have no idea, and it's very important to acknowledge that fact when it comes to runes and runestones and so on. So from the year 400 AD to 1100 AD, the tradition of creating runestones was so alive and well and thriving. So what is a runestone really? A runestone is not a gravestone. Sometimes a runestone can be a lid of a stone cist with runic carvings on it. But runestones aren't gravestones really, they are more memorial stones. So runestones were mainly memorials. These memorials could include poetry. They usually honored deceased loved ones of the person carving or having it carved. And they also sometimes cast spells and curses if anyone were ever to dare to break the stone or hurt the runes. So they were placed by these ancient roads where people would pass by and they could look at them. Some runestones today in Sweden are believed to still be placed by their original site, which is very exciting. So the grave fields were close to the family farm usually. So the burial fields were close to the settlement, while the runestones would be placed around so the people who traveled could easily see them. Last coffee break for the teacher. You're doing good. You and Oscar. You're doing good. You can do it. I believe in you. So besides runestones, runes were also carved on material as wood and bone and gold and silver. One quirky thing about runes that are carved on axes and tools and so on is that oftentimes, I have an example from this. This is an axe found in ancient Lödöse in Sweden, and it says Peter Amik, Johannes Ristimik, which means that Peter owns me, Johannes carved me. So it's like these objects are talking, like this is Peter's axe, and it is Peter's axe that is telling you that it's Peter's axe. That's a bit of a funny quirk that I've noticed with these old tools and personal belongings of the ancient past. So now, when we have gone over the basics, right? You know the basics now, you and Oscar over there, you know the basics. Now I will demonstrate what the different quirks can be when you are encountering runestones in the wild. Because even if runestones are from the same time, it is not certain that the runes look like this, or this, or this. They can look completely different, depending on local tradition, what the carver thinks is cool, and so on. There's a lot of quirks to them, so let's go out in the wild and I will show you how it can actually look in real life. Because this is one thing, right? Reading it in books and seeing this and so on, that's one thing. But going out and looking at runestones and discovering these quirks, that's a whole other story. In this clip you can see the Rök runestone from Östergötland in Sweden. Unfortunately for me and a little bit for you, the microphone died while I was filming this. So what I'm saying basically in this clip is that there is a huge variation of different runes to be found on this stone. The Rök runestone is a Viking Age runestone from around the 800s AD, but even though it is from the Viking Age, it does not only contain Viking Age runes. It does mostly contain the younger Futhark, but it contains the younger Futhark in short twig runes. The short twig younger Futhark looks a little bit different from the younger Futhark we have talked in this video. I will pull up a picture of it here. On the Rök runestone there is also Elder Futhark runes. There is also something called secret runes and runes that look kinda quirky on here. So this is actually how it can look when you come out in real life. The Elder Futhark is not always separated from the younger Futhark and so on. And even if it is mostly younger Futhark, it is not always you would recognize it, because it has its own quirks. During my time of researching and dealing with runes and runestones online, I have come across the common misconception that the same runes are never repeated after each other historically. And this is something that people sometimes have a tendency to mix up. It is true that the runes are not carved down in the same type of language that we speak today. So, for example, double consonants is not a thing, because it's not a thing in the language as far as we know. But however, this does not mean that the runes in their time have never been carved in repeated patterns after each other. And here you can see me showing you the Ledberg runestone, which is one of these examples of runes repeating themselves after each other. There is also the very good example of the Lindholm amulet, which is a bone amulet that shows the same pattern. One thing that you will notice very quickly when you are out looking on runestones, either online or out in the landscape, is that the runes are oftentimes divided by these two dots. That works as kind of a, a middle space between the runic words. However, this can also vary a lot. So here we have a very good example of not only a, so to say, Viking runestone. This is raised for a sun, Gudmar, And Gudmar was killed in England, and what he did there we can only guess, right? This is also a very good example of a runestone with tiny X's or crosses instead of the dots to divide different words. Do you see these? And here we also have this. Here we have dots. Absolutely wonderful stone. This is another example of a runestone that has these crosses or X's instead of the two dots. Even though this stone is typical younger Futhark, it also has a medieval E or E rune. And just beside the stone over there with the crosses, we have this stone with the dots, but also with the same medieval E. Who knows if the carver is the same? They look pretty similar, but still very different. So this is a great example of a woman raising a stone for her passed away husband. So this is Vifrid raising a stone in the memory of Visete, her husband. Here we have an example of a stone where not only who raised the stone is mentioned or who it's for, but also the carver. Guve had this stone financed for his son, Olav, and it was Håvard who carved the stone. One might think that the person who raised the stone would also be the carver, but that is not always the case, or we don't know when that's the case. But when it's this distinct, when it's actually mentioned, then we know that the person raising the stone was not the carver in this case, but this is also a very special kind of stone. It's very masterfully and skillfully done. So this is not only carved in Elder Futhark, this is also carved from this, like it's backwards, and they think that it spells out Haukuthor, which would be presumably a male name. The last real-life quirk that I will bring up in this video is the usage of different punctuations or spaces between runes on the same stones. So on this stone that is mentioning Thor, the god of thunder, we have first two dots in between the runic words. Then it comes a cross or an X just before mentioning Thor. And then after mentioning Thor, there's two dots again. So who knows what this all means? And I will just mention it here. There are also, of course, stones without any dots or crosses or any space in between the words whatsoever. Hey guys, you made it! You made it through the introduction! Woo! Great! So that is the basic of the runes. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something. I hope you found something interesting that you could further discover about the runes. So you have a great day now, everyone. And go and drink some water or some coffee or some tea, because we have been learning a lot today. The basics are always the most to cover, right? Now you can head out into the beautiful landscape or the beautiful landscape of the internet and look up your own runes. You can look up your own runestones and so on, and look if there's different quirks that you recognize or so, and you can say, actually, now it's your turn. You go out there in the world and you get those sweet, sweet actually points that you can get now with all of this knowledge. Class dismissed.